Okay, today I want to talk about the role of the government in the economy. We've got to remember we're in a mixed economy. That means there's the government that takes a big role, but also we've got the private activity, economic activity, that also produces a lot in the economy and distributes a lot of goods and services. Let's just remember the protagonists in the economy. You've got the families that work and buy and save, etc. And then you've got the businesses that produce and distribute and invest money. And then you've got the government, which operates the state, you know, where you've got schools and hospitals and roads and all these products and services produced by the government. Very, very big part of the economy. We're talking about, you know, nearly half the economy is produced and distributed by the government. We've got about 40% of the money supply goes back to the government in the form of tax. So it's a very big role. And then you've got another protagonist, the rest of the world, because we exist in an open economy integrated into the world economy. So there's the rest of the world as a protagonist too. By role of the government, we're thinking, what does it do in the economy? What does it actually do in a big sense? Right. Okay. Yes, so first thing is it's an employer. It's an employer of millions of people. We think hospitals, schools, police, literally millions of people work for the state. Very, very big organisation. The government controls this through its ministries. It controls has contracts with all these people. It does mean it gives a lot of stability to the economy because a job with the government normally in Italy is a very good job. You've got the post officio, got a lot of security. The government doesn't go bankrupt like a business in the private economy can go bust, can fail. Whereas the government, if your role is no longer needed, and sometimes, you know, we stop teaching, there's no more need to teach certain subjects, for example, in the school, but then people can be used in other ways. If you've got years of working for the government can normally find you something to do. So they do give a lot of stability to the economy, to people's lives in the economy, and they can have a big influence. The government can raise people's wages if they think, you know, there's more money needed in the economy, because then the people that work for the government will spend that money in other parts of the economy, etc. So they do have a lot of influence. They do very important jobs, normally fundamental jobs for people's well-being, like hospitals and school. And then the other two roles, so they're an employer. We can say the government is an employer. Another role is it's a consumer and also a producer. Through public expenditure, we've got public expenditure. When the government spends lots of money, it consumes a lot. We call that current expenditure, but also it can produce a lot with capital expenditure in investment. For example, bridges is a capital expenditure, so it's producing a lot. Even if it pays a private company to do it, it's still the government stimulating this production. So produces a lot. Consumption would be using of resources, like a police car. Here we have a very fast police car, and you know, after a few years, it's done its job and it's been consumed. So here, the capital expenditure will last for, you know, many years. There is to be used all the time, whereas current expenditure maybe last a few years. The assets spent on that. So there's three roles we've said. It's an employer, it's a consumer, and it's a producer. And the consumer and producer is through public expenditure. Let's think about public expenditure a little bit. Why do the government spend so much money? What are the objectives? They're not objectives to make a profit. Okay, so that's very important. You know, you've got private enterprise that makes a profit. The whole objective of private enterprise is to find efficient and effective way of using the resources. The government instead, they must have an efficient and effective use of resources, but their overriding objective, their main objective, are other things. For example, public interest. You've got public goods where you've got street lighting, where the public enjoys the benefits of this expenditure because it's public. You know, it's not for each individual. Or you've got merit goods where each individual they spend a lot of money on each. For hospitals and education, merit goods are normally to help an individual with something very important like health or education. And so, yeah, this is for a public interest. We all need street lighting, we all need people to be healed, you know, we don't want diseases to go around, and educated to help us all go forwards. Another reason for public expenditure is to invest in national infrastructure. So the objective here is to improve the infrastructure for everybody. So everybody benefits. When we talk about roads, it's very important that we've got a road system. We connect the whole of Italy together. We feel Italia è una e indivisibile, as they say in the Constitution. And we've got the freedom of movement in the Constitution. It talks about Article 16, the freedom to go wherever. And we need a good system. We need a good road system. We need bridges. We need railways. We need all these things, this infrastructure put down by the government to keep us together. Another very important reason for expenditure is another national interest, which is support agriculture. Every country in the world needs to produce its food. If it imports food from other countries, it depends too much on something so important for life. You know, if we depend on Africa, some African dictator, for our food supply, he would have a big influence on our lives. So we must be able to produce our own food, to be a bit self-dependent, independent in that respect. So normally the government spends a lot of money to keep farmers in business. Even if they're not making a lot of money, they need to be kept able to maintain the job, just in case. And other key industries, you know, maybe we've got a small car industry that's very important for jobs, that needs to grow, and it needs to be protected from competition. So the government spend a lot of money trying to save and protect it from competition, giving it subsidies and grants for opening factories, etc., or for doing research, whatever. So there's very important industries for the country. And then it needs to manage the macroeconomy. We've got this macroeconomy. The macroeconomy, let's think, an economy is the production of goods and services and distribution of goods and services. The macroeconomy is looking at it in a big way, as a whole thing, if you like. So we're talking about inflation, unemployment, all these indicators, GDP, gross domestic product, which is the pill, by the way. And a microeconomy is the opposite, looking at the markets, looking at the businesses, looking at it in detail. So manage the macroeconomy. The government needs, here we've got the GDP, the production of the country goes up and down. This is the normal variations of a GDP. And the government needs to manage this to make it a bit more stable, more flat as it increases. So if it goes too high, it will spend less money. The objective of the expenditure will be to manage this, and it will spend less money to take money out, because otherwise, here we've got inflation, the problems with inflation. As it goes down, you've got this trough or crisis or bust, and you've got unemployment. So here the government needs to spend more money, it needs to have more expenditure and increase the speed of the economy, get the money going round and the economy, the GDP increasing. So this process of management is all about public expenditure, which would be an objective too. You need to reduce inequalities to help the vulnerable. Got lots of poor people. Here we can see lots of poor people in America, and the government's objective must be to help them, whether it's popular housing, maybe better schooling, social services, whatever. But this is important for us all to feel together and that everybody is included in society. In Italy, it's very important. We've got Article 3 of the Constitution that says we've got to remove obstacles which impede the growth to a people. So the government's key role is to use its resources, its expenditure, to remove these obstacles of inequality and freedom, which inhibit our equality and our freedom. As it says in this Article 3 of the Constitution. Government will do that in Italy, mainly in schools and hospitals and big important expenditures like this, but also lots of social housing, etc. So, yeah, we said what a macroeconomy is. Here we can see, when we talk about inflation, we're talking about the macroeconomy, talking about the economy in a big way, in the big picture. Here, if we talk about different strategies for businesses, and this is more about the microeconomy, and it's about markets, etc., and how the market operates. So, GDP, yeah, very important to talk about this. Gross domestic product. This is all the output in the economy. We're talking about public output, so even this lesson is an output, is part of the GDP, or, you know, what our factories produce, all the services in you know, the shops, etc., the restaurants, all the tourism, this is all included. Not always a great thing. We need to increase our GDP because that's where jobs are, that's why we get out of bed, that's why we keep going forwards and we have progress. every time a scientist discovers something, he's producing GDP, and but it's not always positive. I mean, you can have GDP go up because you're building more prisons, or you're going to war, you're building more bombs, and you've got more police, you've got more division in the country. So let's not get too purist about GDP. It's not doesn't necessarily mean we're going in the right direction, just increasing it. We're going to increase it in the right way, really, if we look at it in detail. So we need, more medicines, more discoveries of medicines, maybe more technologies which connect us and make our lives better, maybe technologies which mean that we can do better jobs. We don't have to do repetitive, boring jobs, but we can do more creative jobs. These types of things, have longer holidays. A lot of the GDP in the modern world is not represented by things, but by time. The time we spend, we spend weekends and holidays, and we only do 40-hour weeks, and we have sick pay. And 100 years ago, it wasn't like that. A lot of the progress is because we've got the time. We've got the time now to study until we're 25. Many, many years ago, you had to start work at 7, and then you worked till you died. You didn't have a pension. So the GDP, this progress in the GDP, also represents the time we have to do what we want in our lives and our free time. So it is very, very important, this GDP, to maintaining our lifestyle, but it can also go in the wrong way. And then there's difficulties with calculating it for a country. I mean, every time I paint my house, should that be part of the GDP? Or maybe I fix my car instead of taking it to a mechanic. Or there's the black economy, where people sell things to maybe friends without declaring. There's probably a lot of hidden GDP in Italy. It's not always a good measure. Sometimes it's a measure of how much people are honest about what they're earning. Often maybe the GDP goes down because not because we're producing less, but because we're declaring less, etc., etc. But it's one thing that we really see as an objective of the economy, is to increase this output. Some countries in Europe, for example, have tried to re-look at this and think more about, instead of output, what about well-being? Measure our well-being. Are we happier? Not are we producing more, but are we happier? Can we measure that? Or development of people, etc. So there is a few questions about the importance of this GDP, and should it be changed? If we just go for output, it's too, shallow. It's not looking at it deep enough at the other things that are important.